Hey everyone, it's Chris Murman coming to you one last time. Hope your holidays are going smooth. We're at the 12th principle. So our 12 days of Agile ends with principle number 12, which is lovingly referred to as the retrospective principle. We get into it with some really, I would say talented people on the idea of retrospectives. What's interesting about the retro that Colleen, Troy, Andy, and myself discuss is we're seeing this in like okay, we're getting we're doing the retros. Are we getting anything out of them, or how do we get the most out of them? And I feel like that conversation hasn't necessarily changed or ended in as we come to the near end of 2021. I do feel though that of all the principles, I feel like it's funny. I feel like a lot of the principles have taken a new context, post COVID and quarantine, but retrospectives have as well. Are we doing them in a remote world? Yes. Are they more challenging? Yes. I've heard some really interesting stories from Scrum Masters of how teams are coming up with improvement items. Are they more tactical than they used to be? Are they more holistic and big picture than they used to be? Are we addressing things that are really slowing us down? Are we addressing technical concerns? Are we just in this remote world of just keep cranking out work after work after work? Those are some of the things that Colleen and Troy, Andy, and myself get into. I will say in particular though that we should really be thinking of like, are we even getting anything at all? Am I saying that we should end retrospectives and never do them again? No. I just wonder, um, is the meaning different? And I don't mean that to put down any of the ways that you all are running retros out there, because I am the last person that should be throwing stones because they come from a glass house, right? I I want to say that when I was a scrum master, I enjoyed retros and I did pretty well at them. Everybody just falls into their own habits. You'll hear there are things that I was bringing up in this conversation that was from my lens, like this is how I was receiving it. Whereas Troy had a really unique way of making retrospectives a daily activity in smaller, more meaningful ways. I heard Andy, and Troy talk about how we celebrate those things that we do, how we collect the small wins, the small victories, and such. Those things are still they're still important and they're still necessary. They've just changed, right? I feel like retros have changed so much, and I wonder like how will we on the other side of this? How will we make retros better? How will we make that, for lack of a better way to put them, how will we make them great again? Or were they great in the first place, So let us know let us know in Discord. How are you doing retros differently? How have they impacted your teams differently? Um, there's definitely some great stuff in here. I do think though that as we move into 2022, I think this is something that we could all agree that we could double our efforts on, redouble our efforts, whatever measurement of the effort. I think this is something that we could use even more fresh perspective on, and some kind of coaching each other aspect to it. So enjoy the listen. I really thank everybody for joining us with another listen to 12 Days of Agile. If you've come back again to listen to it, thank you for listening to it with fresh eyes, like I've done. If you're new to this, I'd love how you take these, how they've impacted you. So let us know on Discord, let us know on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the socials. But thanks again, everybody, for listening, and hope the rest of your 2021 is amazing.
This is Jason Little, the world's greatest cold fusion developer, and you're listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
On the 12th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 12 dwarmers dwarming, 11 pipers piping,
10 lords a leaping,
9 ladies dancing,
8 maids a milking, 7 swines a swimming,
no more geese, 5 golden eggs, 4 calling by 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves,
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Hello, and welcome to yet another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. This is thankfully the final episode of the 12 Days of Agile. I'm joined tonight by my colleagues, brothers and sisters in Agile, Colleen.
Hello.
Troy.
Hello.
And Murman.
We did it!
We made it to 12.
We finally just broke out the sound effects. Can you believe we held on this long? Okay, the 12th Agile Principle goes as follows. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. The format for tonight's show will loosely follow Jay's 4 questions. Why is this principle important? Can you share some personal examples where this principle was not paid heed to and what resulted? Yes, it's confession time. If we had to challenge our listeners regarding this principle, how would we? And the 4th and our favorite, if we were to redo the actual carol, what would we title this step? Retrospectives. Colleen, you seem to enjoy a good retro.
I do. I love them.
Why is this principle important?
Well, I think I think there's obvious benefit to the concept of continuous inspection and adaptation and continuous improvement. But I think one of the things that's so important for this, and I feel like I'm being reminded of this right now, kicking off a brand new ground up transformation project, is that I think the process of retrospectives really help teams take their practices and make them their own. Scrum is a guide and Kanban is a guide, and these are guides to how you can use Agile. But the process of regularly reflecting on what's working for you or not working for you as a group helps you figure out how to tweak those practices or tweak what your team is doing so that you can really own your process. And I keep coming back to that right now with this transformation effort and encouraging the teams, start with this foundation and this guide, and then use your retrospectives to make this process your own and make it work for you. And I think that gives people a greater sense of ownership over how they're delivering.
What Colleen just soft pedaled is, I will say it in fewer words. Like, if you're not doing this principle, then the rest of them don't matter. The whole point of everything is to stop and see, what are we doing? Does this make sense? Like, Colleen's dead on. Like, we have to slow down to inspect, right? But bar none, you have to stop. You have to say, does this work? Because most of the time it doesn't. Like, there's no way we can cookie cutter this.
Right. I remember reading somewhere that in the early days of Scrum, there may not have been a prescribed ceremony called retrospective because teams would just fix shit on the fly when they could. They thought, no need to wait. If we can fix this now, why wait? I'm curious, Troy, the first part, at regular intervals, what do you coach teams in the meaning of that phrase? What's a regular interval?
Well, the standard Scrum way of doing things is, on average, let's say most teams do 2-week iterations, right? So most teams, they do their retrospectives every 2 weeks. It's generally, people do like hour long. And I think that's a great way to just get it on a calendar and have like a dedicated time to do it. But I recommend doing it every day, even if it's just small amounts. And when you're looking at your task board or your burn down charts, figuring out, how can we improve from even yesterday? And maybe it's not like a formal thing, but it's more or less getting into the culture of the team and the organization.
Great point, Troy.
Thank you.
Why wait? So who wants to take this toss-up question? What does it mean to become more effective as a team?
So one of us is going to have to say it depends, right? So I'll get it out of the way. That said, now that I've gotten the consultant answer out of the way, I feel like the teams already kind of know, or at least this is my experience. And tell me all if you disagree. There's obviously things underneath the surface that they don't understand. But for the most part, I start with a program or a set of teams or even a single team, right? And I say, tell me what's going on. And you interview them and you do the thing where you go, tell me what you like about your job and what you don't like about your job and what frustrates you most and what would you change if you could. And you do all those interviews and then you start off with your first iteration. Most of the time they know their problems already. We could say whatever we want about our teams. They're not dumb, right? Like the people that we work with are really intelligent people. They just don't have either the understanding of how to step forward or the courage to step forward or someone to give them the cover to say, I feel like this needs to be done. Otherwise, they would have done it already, right?
Let me see if I get you. From your perspective, early on, becoming more effective might simply be challenging the status quo.
Right. Organizationally, there are things in place that keep them from changing, right? They could be political, they could be organizational or hierarchical, they could be or something that I can't even come up with an "ol" for. One of these things is in place, and Andy, you and I have talked about these many times. There are many institutional things in place that keep people from standing up and saying, I want to do things differently.
So maybe some of that's autonomy.
Exactly.
So, Troy, you touched on more frequently than at the end of an iteration.
Right.
What are some of the benefits you see from that?
Well, if you approach this, let's say your daily Scrum or your whatever stand-up format you're using, if you approach it as we coach it as a planning meeting instead of a status update meeting, but also kind of a mini continuous improvement opportunity too. So, what are the benefits? Is that what you're asking?
Well, what do you see? I'm curious because there's several concepts that come up about improvement. It's small, gradual improvements, large improvements.
Okay, fair enough. So something that James actually said on a previous podcast in this series, which I thought I coached something similar, but I haven't used this word the way he's phrasing it. But now I actually started using it in real life work, and I think this could give an example. So if you look at your daily Scrum, right, you have your task board, right, or your story, whatever, if you're using task stories, whatever. And the question, instead of using the 3 questions, you ask like, okay, how do you want this board to look tomorrow? Like that's the main question. How should this board look tomorrow, and how should this burn down chart look tomorrow? What should it look like?
God, that's amazing.
And then like that's the question. And then everyone has to discuss what it's going to look like and how are we going to get it there. Just shifting the mindset from I did this yesterday to how are we going to improve? Because it's going to take constant improvement to get things done differently every day, right? Especially when you look at it. Let's say you're using a story burn down chart, right? And you have 10 sprint days. Day 4 goes by and your story burn down is still flat, right? Like it's pretty common for a lot of teams, you know. And if people aren't using kind of information radiators like this, then they may not realize that, you know, sprints in jeopardy or whatever they're doing is not really on track. So little things like this can help you in your daily, if you're using sprints, if you're using iterations, even if you're just using Kanban, if you're using a flow base, looking at, okay, our cycle time, looking at these types of, if you want to call them information radiators or metrics, looking at it every day, not just like once in a while, right? And using that as ways to improve. Also using things that came out of your retro. It's interesting that the Scrum, new Scrum guide actually has this mandatory now that there has to be one retro item in your next sprint backlog. So even they have embraced this idea of, it was always supposed to be there, but I guess they didn't mandate it. And now technically in Scrum, you know, that they mandate this practice now.
Let's not restart that podcast that you just did a couple weeks ago, Troy. Troy, you've been talking for a bit, but I want to press on this because you said something really interesting. The genius part of that is, how do I want this like, how do you want this board to look like tomorrow? So, all right, so take me back to that situation, right? What happens when you have a team,
right,
and it doesn't look different, or it doesn't look the way they wanted to? Like, tell me as a coach, like, how are you taking them through that? Because that's brilliant.
You just ask questions, you know. Okay, literally, like, you can use 5 whys today. For example, today I used 5 whys without saying I used the 5 whys, but I just kind of used it in the conversation, and I think we got down to 4 and we got the answer, right? You don't have to go all the way to 5, but just ask questions like, okay, guys, well, kind of like you would in a retro, you know, like what happened, right? Okay, yesterday we talked about the board. You wanted to look this way. Today it doesn't. What happened? Oh, well, we had this impediment, or I don't have this skill set. I tried to work on this, but I didn't have the same skill set or whatever. So then that shows you more areas of improvement to work on, maybe for future sprints if you can't do it this sprint. And one of the ways I like to do that is sit down with Scrum Masters and develop like a plan for, creating cross functionality. That's something I've been doing recently. Stuff like that. So you'll find things just out of these daily stand-ups. If you're approaching it from this angle, a lot of things to improve on that you don't even have to wait to the retro to get to.
Troy, with those examples, do you struggle at all to make things small enough that you can follow up on them the next day and not lose track of them? I really love the idea of continuous retrospectives and just making them part of the daily conversation. I feel like when I've tried it, that's the part I lose. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for us there.
When you say making things small enough, are you talking about stories, or what specifically? What are you referring?
Just the action items or the improvements that we want to come out of it. So I think that, when we're doing them daily and saying, we need to increase our unit test coverage, right, for example, how do we do that in a way where we can talk about it again tomorrow, but when do we talk about it again to see that we're making that improvement, or how much time do we need before we follow up on it again?
It's not just talking about the things, because I think that's what you're getting at, Colleen. It's great to talk about them, but you actually have to implement change. So tell us about how that works, Troy.
I think there's two questions there, but one question, Colleen, is, and you might hate me, but I would say it depends. But I think it honestly depends on what it is. If it's something that can be improved from day to day, it could be an impediment. It could be a way of something that's a small change of way of working. Maybe yesterday we didn't pair at all. Tomorrow we're going to try to pair. Today we're going to try to pair because we know that we have to. This is a cliche thing, but stop starting and start finishing, right? So if we know we're going to do that, then we need to pair on things and reduce our work in progress. And that's something that you can probably day to day change. Like, how are we working together? Bigger things like, we need to have a certain percentage unit test coverage. That might take longer to get to, obviously. So I do think you can go retrospective to retrospective. You have bigger items, but you could have things throughout each day that you can adjust on. And those might be more or less ways of working together, collaboration type of things. Another example is I've worked with a lot of teams in the past where once they got to a high performing state, they stopped tasking things out and they just worked on stories. And because they didn't really need to, they felt it was a waste of time. And what they would do is they would pair all the time. They would collaborate really well every day, and they just figured out they would work on the stories. They were small. So I don't think there's like one way of doing it. Just think it depends on the situation and it depends on the team, which I know is a very consultant answer.
All right. So now I'm curious. It sounds like this is the beat up Troy hour, which is not the case, but I think it's because Troy, you threw out down a really interesting and independent idea, or at least one that I'm not familiar with. So let's say you get to the end of the day and say, hey, we didn't quite make the board look the way we wanted to, or the next day you say, hey, why didn't the board look this way? So we talk about it, and we iterate, and we ideate, and we, inspect and adapt kind of a thing. Like, how do you keep track? I mean, so I could see, if I'm putting my devil's advocate hat on, like, that's a lot of stuff to keep track of, right? So, like, if you're the Scrum Master, like, how do you keep track of all that?
Well, if you're co-located, it's kind of, to me, I would just write it up on a board, right? Like, every day, write what the changes are, write what we're trying to accomplish. If you're not co-located, then whatever tool you're using, if you're using Wiki, if you're using Confluence, whatever you use every day, and I would just reference it. So as a Scrum Master, I would bring it right up right before the meeting even started, make it visible, if it's not co-located, right? And reference it. So talk about, like, how did this go? How do we do? And it doesn't have to be, like I said, most of the time it's not going to be huge changes. It's going to be very minimal stuff. And a lot of times it's going to be process-based as far as how are we working together, more stuff. And then there also might be impediments, which as a Scrum Master, you can, that's something that you can take care of and work on with. So it might be another way of revealing impediments that might be different than just answering the 3 questions as well.
There's another technique that I'm reminded of that may play into this daily retro technique, and I forget where I got it from. It's called snake on the board. And if you have a physical board and you're co-located, anytime one of these issues come up, Post-it note goes on the bottom of the board, just as a reminder for the team and to bring with us to retro. What slowed us down? What tripped us up? What in this case that you're using, Troy, what kept us from getting the board to look like we thought it was going to look? So you get a visual indicator. Forgot to pair, so-and-so wasn't available, so-and-so didn't check their code in. And that might be one way, Murm, of keeping track and seeing the patterns. Eventually, if the board gets covered in these problems, you might as well stop working on stories and abandon the sprint and start solving the impediments.
It's like a whip limit for your retro.
What Troy threw down, I'm absolutely trying on the very next program that I coach. That said, the challenge for me as a coach or someone that's coaching Scrum Master is like, wow, that could potentially be a different change a day, or how do we, to your point, Andy, how do we keep track of all that? Are we trying any of these things? Are we just saying we're going to do it? And I think that kind of gets to regardless of whether you do a daily retro or a weekly retro, bi-weekly, tri-weekly, whatever, or you do a retro once a month, or you even go back to the 6-month lessons learned thing, right? Like, it doesn't matter. If you speak your mind and you don't do anything, eventually you're going to stop speaking your mind because you're like, what's the point of speaking up?
Right.
Absolutely. So many retros end that way, right? With a beautiful long action list. And then the next cycle. So what do we get done on that action list? Nothing. Okay, let's have another retro. Let's have some more action lists. I agree with you, Murm, that if it's all talk and no action, it stalls. So you do need a whip limit, but I come back to make it visible. It's been a while since I did a snake on the board because we've gone all digital, but we had a team. We also had a can. Anytime somebody felt they had slayed one of those problems, we had quite the ceremonial crinkle the note up and put it in the can, which we then took to the retro to say, look at all the shit we fixed.
That's awesome. I like that a lot.
So maybe the combo of the two, the daily future look instead of the standard 3 questions, plus some way of tracking the pain that got in the way. And another favorite part of retros for me is the celebration aspect.
Right.
It's not all about, oh my God, what's
Right.
all that's wrong? It is, what do I want to celebrate? A big part of my retros is who's got kudos to share.
Yep. I use that a lot too. Andy, that kudo box from Management 3.0.
Yeah.
Another good one is that happiness door. That's if you're co-located, that's a really cool technique to use that, and you can even check out some of that stuff daily instead of just at the retro.
I just want to go back real quick to what you guys were saying about following up on these action items, because one of the things that I've been really working on with a few of my teams has been keeping all of our retro action items and notes for more than one retro visible. So using those giant stickies, I've kind of commandeered a wall where we do our retros. So we can see back for the last 4 to 6 sprints of what we've talked about. And I really like being able to look back more than just one sprint for these. And I think what's been helpful is, we've had, like, for example, I've got one team for the last 3 retros. So for the last 6 weeks, we have said, we need to make sure there's higher quality of the stories before QA picks them up because we're finding too many defects. And in the last retro where that came up, I said, okay, this has been one of our top action items for the last 3 sprints, and it continues to be a problem. How can we reframe this action item so that we can actually see change happen from it? And so I don't think it's necessarily bad when the team doesn't get their action items all done initially. Sometimes it challenges them to reframe them in a way that's more actionable or more achievable or more specific. But I think it's hard to see that sometimes when we're only looking back 2 weeks.
How do you track how long something's been up there? Do you dot it, how many cycles it's been through, or some other visual way to say, this issue's been here 1, 2, 3, 4 retros. What's going on?
I just date each page. So each page has the retro notes and then the action items, initials, next, who's going to follow up on each action item. And then I circle them if we didn't get them done, and I cross them off if we did at the next retro. So you can kind of see over time, we've kind of built this long timeline of all the things that keep carrying over so that we can really highlight those and say, what's not working? Like, this continues to be the same problem, retro after retro after retro. What do we need to do to actually fix this?
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this because I guarantee it took us 21 and a half minutes to get to it, but I guarantee you everybody that's listening to this is still listening to this is either a scrum master or a coach that's like, how do I get my teams to like actually cross off the things they want to do? So like Colleen just listed her favorite items. Like personally, I think that we all have our own ways of kind of encouraging teams to do this. My personal thought is, I mean, I don't like beating teams over the heads when they don't meet or they don't cross items off the list. Like I follow up with scrum masters like one-on-one to say like, hey, have you noticed like how many of the things you think the teams have crossed off? Because if we're doing our job in retros, we're actually coming out with something actionable and measurable, and we know we've actually accomplished some kind of a thing. But if we celebrate, we celebrate together. I don't tend to beat teams up together. I tend to say like, I start with the scrum master, and if they say, I don't know, let's talk to the team about it. Well, then we'll do it. But if I'm coaching them, I'm just not a giant fan of beating them up. Maybe that's me being hard enough on them, or
Sounds like you're nicer to them than you are to us.
Yeah, what gives, man?
well, you all don't deserve it. First off, except you, Colleen, because you're just sweet as candy.
No one's ever said that before.
I know, that's why I'm saying, like, someone started that in the anniversary episode, and I was like, well, I don't, because you're female, I guess you're the nicest one, and I don't understand that. I just don't, I don't know. I don't like, maybe my struggle is I don't like beating teams up. I would rather them beat themselves up, and so if I can just present the information, and if they choose to beat themselves up, they do, and if they don't, then, man, they're not really ready for it. I don't know.
I don't think it's about carrots and sticks necessarily. Becoming more effective means improving from iteration to iteration. So that does not necessarily meaning finishing an action item. An action item or an experiment that came out of retro could have done nothing. It could have not improved the team. I think the challenge is to make the improvement visible from retro to retro, to share how things are getting better. And if the team hasn't figured out how to find those metrics, maybe that's the coach's or the scrum master's job to say, this experiment, I think it ties into something here. Let's see if we can amplify what we did and see if that continues to improve. And then you get this reinforcing loop, I think, in the team.
So what you're describing is improvement that may or may not relate to the previous retro items. Like improvement can be holistic regardless of whether it meets the previous measurable goal. Yes?
I don't know.
I thought that's what I heard you describe. All right, so tell me, Colleen, Troy, did I hear something different, or did you all hear what I heard?
Cue crickets.
Colleen, you there?
Yeah. Say that one more time.
Yeah, see, exactly. It was too many words, too long at this hour in the day for all of us.
Yes,
So
I know, and I've had whiskey.
how about if I try again?
Go ahead, Andy.
Our teams should not be calling themselves agile teams if they aren't improving from iteration to iteration. And if continuous improvement isn't visible and sustainable, it's going to peter out. If there's something about the environment that doesn't give the team the control necessary to make the changes they want, maybe that's what gets focused on next. But I really think that a healthy team thrives on continuous improvement.
Chris, if I can just jump in here, because you were asking about how there was a difference of how do we get them to do it, the carrots and sticks thing, and we're talking about different approaches to it. So just a tip I have for anyone listening, obviously if you're still listening to this, you're interested in this topic. So agile teams are self-organizing, and self-organization doesn't come overnight. And just because someone says you're self-organizing now doesn't mean you're actually self-organizing. Right? So in order for them to improve, they have to keep each other honest and accountable for their own things, and without management telling them to do it. And in order for that to happen, they kind of have to be guided and coached on how to be self-organizing. In fact, that's one of the first responsibilities of a Scrum Master is coaching a team in self-organization. So one of the tips I have for that is establish working agreements, and I'm not talking about our sprints are going to end on Tuesdays. I'm talking about things that the team is going to hold each other up and hold each other accountable for internally. So one of the ways I like to facilitate that is to ask the team members what can they bring to the team that the team members can count on them for. So it's kind of like this format of where you can count on me to do something, right? And then they'll write it like on a sticky note. So you can count on me, and it's usually, sometimes they'll write technical stuff, but a lot of times it's more about how team dynamic stuff. What can I bring to the team, right? And then we take all those things, put them on a board, have the team members go up to that board. Now they have everyone's sticky notes up there and prioritize the things that they feel like should be whole team things that they would like the whole team to hold each other accountable to. And then review those at retros. So for instance, a good one is Josh Kiarowski's got this term, whose modernagile.org is his website if you're interested in some of the stuff. And he's got this term called mean time to conflict resolution. And it's all about psychological safety. And it's talking about the health. You can tell the health of a team by the average time it takes to resolve a conflict. I usually start off the conversation talking about this kind of stuff. And that's what we're looking for when it comes to working agreements. And so actually one of the last time I did this 2 weeks ago, that was actually one of the team's kind of working agreements was that, you can count on me to resolve or bring up uncomfortable things without hesitation. That was something that they agreed that they were going to hold each other accountable to in retros. So it'll be interesting to see how that works.
That's fantastic.
So that kind of stuff. So hopefully this team I'm talking about, which was 2 weeks ago, this was a particular thing that they came up with, and they're going to hold each other accountable to it. So once they start doing that stuff, then specific items like technical things or whatever, to me, that'll be easier to do, because if they're holding each other accountable for without management or anyone telling them to do it, that's the key. So that's a tip. That's something I like to facilitate, those working.
Troy, that's a great experiment. And you create an environment that's safe so people can be honest. Troy, I love that. You create this environment of safety where people can be honest with each other about what's working, what isn't working. And that is just so powerful. And then it solves your problem, Murm. You don't have to yell at people. They'll yell at themselves. And they'll celebrate the successes, and they'll look at the failures, and they'll learn something from it. That, to me, I think gets at the heart of this principle. Right? It's at regular intervals. It's not the Scrum Master beats the team into being more effective. It's the team reflects. They look at themselves in the mirror, and they trust their compatriots to point out the blind spots or areas where they might be tripping up. And then everybody tunes and adjusts accordingly.
There's one more piece of this, and then I know we need to wrap up, but there's one more piece of this that I'm curious for Colleen and Troy's insight. Is the number of times that I've been sitting across from a Scrum Master and they're like, and I say, okay, how do you know you're going to get better at the thing you all decided on in retro? And they go, what do you mean? And I say, well, you can't just go on feeling, right? You feel that you're communicating better in stand up. How do you know you're communicating better? How do you know that you're more connected with the business? I found that's my biggest challenge. Is my encouragement to Scrum Masters to say, keep pressing until you get something measurable. So how do you all do it?
I think I may have talked about this in a previous podcast, and it definitely ties back to the company that I founded, Scatterspoke. But we created kind of 5 categories just based on reviewing a buttload of data that we had collected on all the different types of cards that people were posting in retros, and looking a buttload.
That is a unit of measure. Is it metric or imperial?
It's a metric shit ton. So when we went through and looked at all these cards, what we found is that a lot of them were just very observational in nature, which makes things hard to improve on. It makes things very subjective. And it's hard to pull actions from a lot of those things. It can also, I think, contribute to that feeling of your retro being a bitch session, for lack of a better word. or feeling like everybody's just taking an opportunity to vent. So I think that's healthy. But what we came up with were the other types of data that you need to collect, and that's stats, so just actual metrics and data, events, so what things happened during this sprint, and that can be as simple as we were down somebody for 3 days because of a holiday weekend or something. Observations are still included there, and then kudos, and then past retros. So looking back to past retros to see, are we having the same conversation over and over again? So I usually write those 5 categories on the board and ask everybody to post at least one sticky in each category so that we're getting a distribution of those different data types. And it really helps, I think, to give people a moment to pause and say, I might say, I feel like we got less done this sprint than last sprint. But if I'm looking at those categories, I might reframe the way I'm posting that sticky up to say, we got 13 less story points done this sprint than last sprint. So I'm rooting it with stats. So I think encouraging the team to try to really spread out the type of data that they're posting as a group can help give you more actionable things to improve upon.
That's great. And I want to challenge you, Col. If you say we got 13 less done this sprint, are you scolding them?
No, I actually wouldn't put that up there at all. I would have the team put that up. But if they were saying, it feels like things got faster, or we're communicating better, maybe asking like, what evidence did you see that makes you think that? Or were there any events this sprint that led you to that conclusion?
Asking for metrics, back to Murm's question.
Yeah.
Because sometimes getting more effectively doesn't mean faster, harder. It just means better, which could mean slower, could mean less.
Right. Yeah. Better quality.
Two questions. Troy, if we had to challenge our listeners regarding this inspect and adapt principle, what would you suggest?
Challenge
our listeners regarding this one.
Yeah, I would say the first thing to do is, if you're already having regular cadence retros, try doing mini ones every day. Just give it a shot. Try doing some type of continuous improvement instead of just 2-week improvement cycles. Right? Just give it a shot and see how it goes. And it might be painful at first, but it's just like anything. It takes time.
Murm, if we had to redo the actual carol, 12 drummers drumming, how would you title this step in the context of an agile team? I know it's your favorite.
I'm trying to get my singing voice ready. 12 unresolved metrics.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, if this agile coaching stuff doesn't work out, we're going to kick up a band. Murm in the scrums. Well, thank you, Murman. Troy, Colleen, it's been a blast. And to our audience, we hope you enjoyed tuning in to as many of these as we did making them. And I want to remind you that support from listeners like you make podcasts like this possible. Check out our show notes to see how you can become a patron of the Agile Uprising for less than the cost of a single craft beer.
Happy holidays.
That's all for tonight. Hope there's great presents under the tree.